Misha here, and kind of returning to the roots of this channel. I felt like talking about the Star Trek Starships official collection, which is now under FanHome. And really going to talk about how we went from Eaglemoss to Master Replicas, how that kind of failed, and then how it ended up at FanHome, and then even that got delayed for reasons. And of course, me being me, we'll also talk about some of the ships and an in-universe history and explanation, and give some of my own thoughts as to whatnot, because we're living in a time where there is just a group of people that no matter what new media, not just Star Trek, but any new media does, they're not going to like it. And frankly, that doesn't annoy me, it bores me. That's also not to say that all new media is good. It doesn't mean new is good and you have to always defend it. Like everything else, there's some really good stuff and there's some absolute trash. So, I'll touch on what I think is maybe worthwhile in the current Star Trek era, because there definitely is some really good stuff. And some things that I think is pretty ridiculous. On the other hand, to be fair, Star Trek has always had some pretty ridiculous elements. Anywho, with that, let's dive in and go back to the latter half of the 24th century and talk about the Luna class and how it was delayed because of the Borg and the Dominion. The USS Titan of the Luna class, the original NCC 8102. Actually, the second member of her class to launch, following the USS Luna NX 8101, later reclassed as NCC. That's how Starfleet does it. The genesis of this class. This was designed as a long-range, long-endurance, so basically another 5-year mission or more, deep space explorer. And the project goes all the way back to 2369 with the discovery of the Gamma Quadrant wormhole. So they were in development. Then the Borg incursion to Sector 001, followed soon by the Dominion War, meant that while Luna started under construction along with 5 sister ships, they were really backburnered for about 5 years. But after the end of the Dominion War, around 2375, they got back on track, and by 2377, the Luna herself was sent out on her first shakedown cruise, and by 2379, the first 6 ships in the class, all named after moons in the Sol system, later members of the class, because they had produced at least 3 or 4 dozen, could be named after moons of other Federation ships. Federation members. So yes, in 2379, as the first 6 were about ready to be sent out, some would go to explore the deep reaches of space, although not really the Gamma Quadrant now. Some would be sent to Cardassian space to kind of help peacekeeping and essentially just provide resources and help the Cardassians rebuild. But the now Captain Riker would be sent with the Titan over to Romulus to try to open up negotiations with a small task force following the whole coup and destruction of much of the Romulan government and the Shinzan kind of takeover. This is before the supernova was detected, although just in a couple of years that would become a thing. And from there we see the ship pop up in 2380 with the Pakled thing, and in 2382 it appears again in lower decks, and presumably through its entire history, Riker seems to be its captain. We know that the ship itself was decommissioned around 2396, so the hull itself was roughly 20 years old. And there's a reason why it was maybe decommissioned a little early, as opposed to just kept on like Starfleet would do with other ships. So what about the specs of this fine traditional Starfleet vessel? Overall length is about 454 meters, and it had roughly 22 decks, including a couple in its mission pod up here. It had a standard crew of 350, although it had room for more. It had one main shuttle bay back here, and it primarily equipped the Type 6A shuttle, replacing the original Type 6 shuttle. It had a couple of photon launchers in the pod, and then 2 quantum torpedo launchers down on the hull, as well as phaser strips, defense shields. It could cruise easily at warp 8 for long duration, and could well go above warp 9.8 for a certain set of time. Now this model here was manufactured originally by Eaglemoss, and we can start kind of talking about the interesting history we get. Because in 2022, Eaglemoss essentially fell apart. They had been a part work, a magazine, and model maker for a long time, but their debts and post-COVID stuff kind of caught up with them. And so this would be one of the last ones they made under kind of a new Lower Decks brand, although they only get to make 4 or 5 different models in that. But I didn't actually get this one from Eaglemoss. This actually came from Master Replicas. After Eaglemoss fell apart, they basically bought the remaining stock and inventory. There was either in country or over in China at the warehouse, and or even in the factory, whatever was already there. And they had the rights to repackage and open up a online marketplace and distribute these, at least for a year. Interestingly, at this time in 2022, they don't actually get the rights to make all new models. Yeah, the way licensing of products works, you don't actually need the license from CBS Paramount to make sales of existing ships that are already there, because they were made under license with Eaglemoss. Now, Master Replicas was going to try, as far as I know, for the license, and they thought for a chance they might have it, but, well, as it turns out, well, different story. Anyway, it's a nice model. This is actually the same time we've got the Luna class. We got a small one in the bonus series with the regular series. This is considered a special size. It's pretty heavy. Metal, plastic for the nacelles, metal back here, plastic for the pod. Pretty standard. It's officially from Lower Decks. We will be getting one more aligned with Picard, but pretty similar. And these ships would pop up throughout the show. It started off in 2005, though, as a fan-made design requested by Star Trek, CBS, Paramount. It would go into Star Trek Online, which is still not technically canon, although many would think it should be. Then eventually it would be made canon via Lower Decks, in so much as you consider that canon. And then finally it became live action, true 100%, no one can argue about it, canon with Star Trek Picard. Now you might be saying, well, the Titan was mentioned in Star Trek Nemesis, the last of the traditional films. True, but it was never seen on screen. Also, fun fact, it's actually mentioned on a screen in TNG Remastered in an episode of the Future Imperfect. Kind of a neat little nod to continuity. Yeah, Riker's original USS Titan. This model was originally made by Eaglemoss, but actually distributed and sold by Master Replicas. But this next one I actually got straight from Eaglemoss a year or so before they closed. The Wallenberg class tug or supply or repair rescue ship. This actually replaced the much more clunky looking repair ship we saw in DS9 in the Dominion War. And I don't know if this model was really meant to represent one individual ship. We actually see quite a fleet of these being made at Utopia Planitia, Mars, in the 2380s. This is part of the big fleet that was created to help evacuate the Romulans once it was discovered their star was going to go supernova. Now, other Federation ships would be called upon, but they needed as many ships as they could get, and the specifications are basically they needed to be able to haul as many people safely and securely, and also communicate and coordinate with each other in a large fleet. So ships that could be pulled out of mothballs were. Existing ships were retrofit as quickly as they could be. But a tug like this was perfect. So they would make tons of these. And, well, it could be configured however they want. It could haul cargo pods, which they would retrofit many of those into basically housing. It has a truncated saucer, does have a minor phaser strip for defense, and has very powerful tractor beams, manipulators in front. It's not especially fast, but it requires a small crew. Anything else, the Wallenberg name is kind of cool, because then it's your World War II era Hungarian Rail Wallenberg that helped rescue and hide and protect many Jewish people during the war from the Nazis. Fun fact, he survived the Nazis only to disappear under the Soviets, though, so. And I've said in many videos that I actually like background ships a lot. I mean, hero ships, you gotta have them in a collection. You do. But to me, it's the background ships, almost the civilian ships, that make a world really come alive. And we saw this in the first season of Picard, and it's appeared in other places. And I do like it. It's a very stripped down. They literally just took a saucer and cut the sides away. It looks like a ship that was just the bare necessities. And again, it's still a lot more attractive than the DS9 towing ship. This is part of Eaglemoss's Star Trek Universe collection, where they kind of combined several lines, Disco, Picard, into one. And it was kind of at this point where a lot of the naysayers were really poo-pooing. And don't get me wrong, I actually don't think season 1 of Picard, I think, is the weakest. I'm one of those weird people that actually really likes season 2, but oh well, different tastes. But yeah, I agree, season 1, it had its highlights. And at least they played off the supernova, which was actually established in the JJ films. Again, they're not my favorite either, but they had their highlights. But I don't think this stuff is just without complete soul. Because I think the people that really think the new stuff is complete rubbish, they're really, really looking at original Star Trek with rose-tinted glasses. Because, well, many of the things that new Star Trek does that people don't like, some of it I don't like either. The truth is, the original stuff from the 80s and 90s is guilty of as well, including plot holes and inconsistencies in size and length and inconsistent characters. Janeway, anyone? Doesn't mean I still don't enjoy Voyager. And it doesn't mean I can't enjoy Star Trek Picard, even season 1 on a rewatch. Everything else, it's great to have Patrick Stewart again, because we won't have him forever. And at least he gave us something, at the end. So, if nothing else, I think we'll look back and be grateful we got a little more of his acting before the curtains would be called for him. And I think the Wallenberg is an interesting piece of history. It's a little bit lighter, although this is still metal. But yeah, this is the original Eaglemoss, done when they were still in business, but at the tail end of their thing. But our next ship is actually the first one in this video that was designed and produced entirely through FanHome. The USS Enterprise NCC 1701F Odyssey class. Kind of like the Luna class, this one had a long journey to full canonization. Starting off with Star Trek Online, is kind of a dreadnought type starship. It eventually made its way into full live action with Picard. And for fans of Star Trek Online and all that, kind of like with the Titan, I think there should be something said there. They could have ignored it, they didn't. And they even pretty much kept the Star Trek Online vibe. Although they did push forward the whole timetable of the ship by quite a bit. Originally, it wasn't launched until the early 25th century in Star Trek Online, but in the Picard timeline, in 2380, the USS Odyssey was under construction, with the USS Verity just being laid down. And then the whole Romulan issue popped up. And at this point, after a vote was taken, Starfleet was going to have to devote all of its resources for the next few years to that. And they looked at these two ships, and the Odyssey was pretty well under construction, the Verity not. So they actually temporarily mothballed the Odyssey, shipping her off to stowage and Jupiter orbit, which actually probably would save her after the synth attack. But the Verity, they would redesign her into a command ship to be the flagship of the task force to be sent to head off those Wallenberg ships and many, many others to help the Romulans and help, of course, other planets nearby like Remus and all that. And this would be when the Verity and modified Odyssey class would be given to Admiral Jean-Luc Picard. So technically, I guess it was a variant, but it would actually see space before its sister. Now, in both canon and Star Trek Online, it's about 1,060 meters long. So, almost twice as long as the Galaxy class, and, 50% longer than a Sovereign. And has a crew of around 1,600 or up to 2,000 some odd in the online source. And it has the Aquarius, kind of large-scale runabout, a very, very large bridge. It's got a lot of space. And it's capable of warp 9.99, not to mention transwarp and, all the modernizations. So, while I tend to agree that a lot of newer Star Trek, especially like the JJ stuff and the Disco stuff, really goes crazy with the size, I sincerely believe sometimes they don't, or sometimes they're in meters and feet. With this, it goes to show you that even with the online ships, they were really making them big. Speaking of, like I said, this is from FanHome. It came in a month or two ago. And it is considered an XL edition. It's a little bigger than the standard ships. The standard ones are 8.5 inches. This guy's about 10.5 inches, maybe 11. Almost a foot long. It's very similar in size and scope and weight to the Enterprise E. Got a lot of metal up here and back here, with the nacelles being your ABS plastics. It's got pretty good weight for it. It has a lot of Enterprise E going on in its overall look, but then the deflector is more Enterprise D and has this very interesting split gooseneck, and then it kind of flows into the back over here. And then we have a very large main shuttle bay. This was originally designed as a very long-range deep space explorer, also command ship, mobile ship. I mean, it's a huge ship. But while the design was really planned for before the whole Romulan thing and before the synth attack, it would change it. This was this era in Starfleet after the Dominion War when they were really trying to get back to kind of peaceful, trying to get back to that golden age that the Galaxy class was birthed in. But after recent aggressions, this has a lot more armament. But at this time, before the synth attack and kind of, I don't want to say a dark age in the Federation, but before resource scarcity and a problem with production, there's a bit of grandiosity with the Odyssey design, much like the Galaxy. Now, if you're thinking, where did the Enterprise F come from? Well, it was commissioned in 2386 after the Enterprise E was lost thanks to Commander, or maybe at the time Captain Worf, even though he denies he had anything to do with it. Yeah, sometime before it was lost. So one of the upcoming Odyssey ships was given the Enterprise name, and they built at least 13 of these ships. So the original Odyssey and then at least 12 sister ships. But because of the synth attack, their construction would be slowed, although never stopped. Now, like I said, this was made by FanHome. Master Replicas had the rights to distribute the existing stock of Eaglemoss ships until June of 2024. And they had been trying to get the license from Paramount CBS to, continue where Eaglemoss had left off, making new designs, new publications, but they didn't get it. Instead, Paramount went with FanHome. Now you might be thinking, well, who's that? Well, why'd they go with them? Well, the reason was they said they were a more established global distributor. They'd been at it longer. They knew what they were doing. And who the hell is FanHome? Well, they're a subdivision. It's a brand name under DeAgostini. Now, that name you should recognize. DeAgostini has done lots of stuff. And when I found out FanHome was part of them, okay, that makes a lot more sense, frankly. DeAgostini has distributed stuff for a very long time, and if they go under, they're going to take half the model world with them. So that's who's doing it. And I will give credit. Since I signed up, this is the first time I've actually ever got a subscription. I actually never did subscribe to Eaglemoss. I just would buy the ones I wanted. But their shipping is amazing fast. Like, I would get a email on Tuesday saying my shipment was being prepared. I'd get a tracking number from FedEx on Thursday, and it would be there on Saturday. Ironically, these always seem to come when I'm at the cabin. This is kind of the schedule. But yeah, they're so far, we're 5 issues in, 6 issues, whatever. They've been pretty consistent, and I hope they keep it up. Although, in the very beginning, FanHome kind of announced things in late 2024, and the first ships were released in November, but then they had to kind of suspend subscriptions and even shipping by the end of December because they claimed that the demand was much greater than they had expected. And I think they were just having some logistical issues, really getting up and running with all new stuff. And I'm happy that they seem to have gotten their stuff in order and are shipping, and you can judge for yourself, but it seems like their manufacturing is just as good as Eaglemoss ever was. I mean, same factories are probably making these. The only thing I can say is the bases are the same, but whereas the Eaglemoss had a small sticker, either gold or silver, on the underside that gave you an individual number and a name, these don't have the sticker on the underside anymore, which, okay, I get it. I mean, you can't even see it, so yeah. But yeah, the Enterprise F. This is still in service in 2401. It's under the command of Admiral Shelby. Cool that they did bring her back, even if her visit was brief, and I really hope she's not dead, frankly. I mean, it's Star Trek, so no one's dead till they're really dead. Just ask Spock. Anyway. But it's scheduled for early decommissioning in Picard. It does survive. It's not destroyed. It's said that it had suffered some damage during a recent mission, and instead of retrofitting it and correcting all the issues, it was just to decommission it. And that's because after the synth attack, and the loss of the Utopia Planitia shipyards, and all the resources lost with that fleet gone. Star Trek, well, the Starfleet world, the Federation, it's suffering maybe its first quasi-economic crisis in a long time. Yeah, I know, it's supposed to be the future, there's no money. Yeah, there's still money, there's still resources. They need themselves some gold-pressed platinum. So as we move into the 2390s, they're changing the way they do things. And of course, they're having to fall back on some older yards like the San Francisco Fleet Yards and some alien yards at Andoria. Unfortunately, the Vulcan shipyards really aren't up to producing anything. So we have a whole new generation of ships. And a lot of them, and then a lot of them, and then we have the copy-paste fleet. Oh, the Inquiry class. You know, I do like it. It's just the copy-paste thing kind of gave us all a bad taste. And I don't know which one I grabbed here, because Eaglemoss from the very beginning was going to do the 4 variants we saw at the fleet at the end of Picard Season 1. There was a version with short nacelles with yellow Bussard collectors. That was the Zheng-He. There was the same version with red Bussard collectors. There was the version with, well, we'll look at it in a second, long nacelles, red, and then long nacelles, yellow, or some say orange, but you get the idea. Those are called the Mahi, the Toussaint, and, oh crud, what was the last one? Yeah, oh well. The Varian Fry, there it is. And I got the Zheng-Shi from Eaglemoss directly, and I might have got the Toussaint from them as well, although I can't remember. But then the other ones in the fleet I did pick up from Master Replicas, as they were kind of getting rid of them, and that tickled me. Now, Eaglemoss was smart. They only made the Zheng-He as a standard issue. The other 3 were meant to be special bonuses, or actually I think that the Saint was a collector's gift. So they wanted to do the fleet, but they knew really the only differences in the nacelles. And honestly, we're even lucky we got that. But let's go back to in-universe. So post synth attack, we've lost a lot of ships, a lot of resources. They need ships to make a rapid response strike force quickly, and they need to just crank them out. And these would have to come from alternative shipyards. And we get the Inquiry class. These are fielded by 2395, so at the tail end of the 24th century. And they were designed to be minimal crew, high automation. There weren't a lot of frills. In some ways, it was like an overgrown Defiant class. But they were powerful, they were fast, and they were strong. Overall length of this version is about 630 meters, with a crew of roughly 500. For its size, quite small. It had a large, easily accessible shuttle bay for relief operations. It had quantum torpedoes, as well as, of course, photons could be launched. The most up-to-date phasers, very good shielding, and very strong armor and hull, and a whole new type of deflector dish. At least some think it's a deflector, some say it's a shuttle bay. I tend to think it's a deflector, just an armored one, because, well, as we know from First Contact, if you destroy up a deflector dish with the anti-protons, the whole ship goes up. So maybe getting away from an exploding deflector isn't such a bad thing. And you can tell the engines were a different design, a different shape of nacelle. And I do like how they sweep forward. And it's a new ship design. It does have a new aesthetic to it. It's very sleek, very minimalist, not a lot of flair. I'm cool with that, considering where Federation, where Starfleet's at this era. The problem is, they do the copy-paste fleet. There's, 200 of these ships? And at the beginning, the powers that be just wanted them all to be identical. What they should have done was one of two things. Either just had a smaller fleet, say 20, 25, and then it wouldn't have been so crazy that they were all the same. Or had 20 or so of this type, and then just populated the rest of the fleet with existing CGI models, even if they were low mesh, just, put them in the background. But yeah, the idea that they had 200 of the exact same ship, it would be absurd, except the Dominion War and Deep Space Nine already showed us that Starfleet had a lot more ships than we thought. Going back to TOS, if you had 3 ships together, that was a pretty good deal. And if you had 6 ships together in the TOS era, that was a huge fleet. Wolf 359 with 40 ships was one of the largest assemblages of Starfleet power in a long time. But then you get to the Dominion War, and ships are counted in the hundreds and even over 1,000 at one point. The difference is a lot of those were small ships, like the Defiant class, the Saber, what have you. This is a ship that's almost as long as a Galaxy, although it doesn't have near the bulk and girth, and it has about half the crew. Still, it's a major ship. 200 of these with 500 people each on them, that's a lot of people. That's a force of, 100,000, assuming they're fully crewed. Although, since they are automated, who knows. But like I said, there's 2 versions of this with the upswept short nacelles in either red or yellow. And we can say that in universe they were experimenting with different warp systems. And of course, in the real world, we were, lucky to get at least some variety in the fleet. And we were lucky that Eaglemoss made some variety for us too. And here's one of the other alternative nacelle versions. These are a little longer at about 640 meters. And again, either in red or yellow. And one of these was the first ship I ever got from Master Replicas. In fact, I remember it came in a day when I was out at the land meeting with the first contractor I had in the summer of 2023. Now, he didn't work out, but oh well, such is life. But yeah, this ship is forever tied with that day. In fact, it was the day that J-Ro and I got stuck outside. We were going to go across the street, and we thought we had a key to get in and get some air conditioning and water, but we didn't have the right key. So that was a very hot, very dry day. Oh well. But yeah, this is one of the alternative versions, and pretty cool. Very different shape to these nacelles. They kind of look like giant cigars to me. If only the hull up front were a little different. Of course, when this first came out through Master Replicas, we thought they would be the new creator of things. But then by the end of that year, beginning of 2024, we start to realize, hey, no new ships are coming out. They were just existing Eaglemoss, even some unreleased stuff, sure, but it was still stuff that was in the works with them. Sorry, a little dusty. It's very dry here now. And actually, in June of 2024, they had a Everything Must Go sale at at Master Replicas of their whatever Eaglemoss stuff was left. Now, they typically only had 25 or 30 of each individual ship left. It was really the leftovers of the leftovers. Still, they had some really good buys. So they only distributed these for just about a year, give or take. But like I said, it wouldn't be long that September-ish of 2024, right as Master Replicas is dipping out, the whole FanHome thing is introduced. The Inquiry class I actually like, and it's in Star Trek Online, of course, and it has been updated for subsequent seasons of Star Trek Picard, and we'll say just either a variant or a refit, namely giving a more conventional deflector area. Again, I don't hate this one, but it is one point that is very different. I'll give it that. Still, it was good to see Riker on the bridge of a vessel again. Like I said, Star Trek Season 1, my least favorite, but it had its moments. One thing I will say, unequivocally, that Picard did right. It's sad that Thaddeus Riker died, but it's nice to see that Riker and Troy's marriage was a healthy one. They actually, not just healthy, but it wasn't fairy tale. They had their ups and downs, And when you see them interacting together, they really do feel like an old married couple for, good reasons, really. They could have very easily had them break up or one of them die, kind of like Star Wars did with Han and Leia. But it was nice to see that they were happy. They had at least one surviving child. Overall, good. I mean, life could have been a lot worse. Again, sad they lost their son. But I do think it's neat how they named their children. One after Wracker's ancestor and one after Troy's sister who died in childhood. So that was neat. No, I don't hate the class, and I'm glad it's around. And it definitely kind of fits in with where they're at post loss of the Utopia Prelicia shipyards and so much of the Starfleet, quite frankly. And that would explain why we kind of see this next generation of vessels. And with that, let's look at actually the most recent ship I received. The SS Helios 12. A Phoenix-class vessel. And this ship exemplifies what I think is neat, but also an issue with Picard Season 3. But before we get to that, let's talk about in-universe. This was designed in the relatively late 24th century as essentially a complement or somewhat replacement for the Danube-class runabout. It was kind of an experiment in high sustainable warp in compact small ships. It's kind of the freighter transport version of, say, a Defiant. It's about that size, but the Defiant wasn't the fastest thing in the world. It really emphasized weaponry and armament. This is the exact opposite. The Phoenix class was designed for top speed, long range, independence, endurance, but it didn't have a lot of tactical abilities. You didn't have the strongest shields. It really only had one phaser emitter, no photon launchers as far as I could tell, and it required a relatively small crew. Now the SS Helios here, it's seen in the hands of Dr. Crusher. I don't know what her final rank was, if she stayed at commander. It did make it to captain, as we saw in All Good Things. Who knows? But it's pretty much privately owned under the auspices of the Mariposas organization, based on the end of Picard Season 2, which I like. Helios as a name is actually the Greek spirit, kind of a demigod, meaning mercy. And the class name Phoenix is, yes, after Zephyrin Cochrane's Phoenix warp ship. Overall length is a little over 119 meters, but of course a lot of that is these pylons and nacelles. It has 4 decks, at least that are habitable, and it has a standard crew of around 13, although as we saw in Picard Season 3, it could be operated rather successfully by as few as 2 individuals, although one would imagine they were rather busy. Kind of like a Danube-class runabout, quite frankly. As far as that high warp, now keep in mind it's for its size and era. Max warp was warp 8.7, but most of your shuttlecraft and even the Danube runabout, they had a max warp of between 4 and 6. This had a sustainable, long duration warp of 7.2. And that was thanks in part to new warp nacelles, a new design that will actually be carried over to larger designs very soon. It also has this warp governor back here, which is actually old technology, at least an old idea, taken from the NX class and updated for the 24th, 25th century. And yes, the whole design itself is pretty well inspired with the NX class, even its kind of bronzy gold color. You can love that or hate it. I've been on record as having been a fan of Enterprise. Again, I know it's faults, I know it's not perfect, but I rather enjoyed Enterprise and think it deserved at least the 5th season, With all the revivals and crap going on, can we not ever have an Enterprise revival? Maybe I just say that because I'm a huge Scott Bakula fan. I love Quantum Leap. R.I.P. Al. Anyway, so it's a small, fast little ship. And originally these were in Starfleet service. They were used as EMS, essentially rapid response, extended medical, expeditionary medical ships, to be sent out to far-flung worlds to respond to Federation worlds quickly, or just, put out a goodwill type deal. They could also be used as just a general transport or freighter, a VIP transport. Even though they weren't that big, they could still carry a small contingent quite quickly, comfortably. And they were still designed for pretty independent operations. And they were testing out some pretty advanced warp technologies. Again, kind of a partial replacement for larger shuttlecraft like the Type 11 and whatnot. And just pushing the boundaries forward. What happened to this ship here, and we don't know if Helios was always its name, if it was renamed, probably renamed. It was essentially decommissioned from Starfleet service in the 2390s and acquired by Crusher, not illegally, but behind the scenes. Let's just say it might have not been in a shipyard that it was supposed to be. One can imagine these might have worn out quicker than other ships because they were probably used very hard. Probably had a lot of light years on the space frames in just a few years. So one can imagine, since they're relatively small and cheap to produce, that they would just mass produce them, use them for 5-10 years, and then retire them out of service one way or the other. It also kind of reminds me of the Franklin. I know it's, the NX, but there's something about it that really reminds me of the USS Franklin, which is another highlight, I think, of the Abrams verse, but I digress. But yeah, the Crushers, maybe they had a crew at one time, maybe not, operated this ship on behalf of the Mariposa's medical thing. And then, of course, we catch up with it in 2401 at the beginning of Picard Season 3, when it's in a nebula. And it's seen better days. But even before the attacks, it was patched and repaired and had parts replaced, but it was still going. It put up with quite a beating until it was turned into a rock and thrown at the Titan. But it did its job admirably and kept its 2 crew alive. So yeah, we have a total of 4 decks, again, kind of like the Franklin. You've got basically 2 cargo and crew and medical decks, and you have 2 other decks that are more command and control. You have a slightly larger one down here, and then you have deck 1, as usual, that is the bridge up here. And one cool feature is it does have a docking port right here in the back that gives you a really good idea of scale. These ports are about 3 meters in Star Trek, if memory serves, 3.5. They're considered pretty much universal for lots of things, even like shuttle pods from back in the day could still use them. So, it gives you an idea. This is not a tiny, tiny ship. It definitely has much more cargo and crew capabilities than even a large shuttle. But compared to any starship, even the NX-01 was over 200 meters long, so it's still smaller than that. And one would imagine it would have to have a high degree of automation to be used by just 2 folks. But yeah, this is the most recent example I have. I believe they're got a couple more coming out, but I really like it. It's a neat one. It's Federation, but a little different color than nacelles. They're kind of swept in, giving it that speed look. The gold color, the texture. It's got a lot of weight to it. This is metal till you get back here, and then of course this is plastic, but it's a pretty good size, frankly. About 8.5 inches by quite a good width too. And again, it's a neat little world building background ship, and even though it was only in a couple of episodes, it played a critical role. But what do you think of it? And what do you think of kind of ship designs from Picard Season 3? There were a lot of Federation ships because of the Fleet Day formation that we saw. We won't get them all in the collection. That would almost be impossible. But if they kind of deliver as planned, we'll get most of them. The USS Titan NCC 80102A of the Constitution 3 class, also known as the Neo Constitution or Neo Connie. Well, this was where FanHome began, and I think it's a vessel most all of us wanted. I'll be honest, I was kind of hoping we would somehow get the updated Constitution class from Discovery, the one from the 31st century. This is pretty cool too, though. Although, I don't think I'll love it as much as some people, I'll be honest. It's very obviously, they went back to the Constitution, especially the Constitution refit design. Sometimes called the Enterprise class. And updated it for the 25th century. This was one of the post-synth attack ships, post-loss of Utopia Planitia, and it built upon the warp engines kind of tested by the Phoenix class, just scaled up. So they're capable of quite high warp for the size, warp 9.99. Speaking of size, there's a stated size of 560 meters. I don't think so, and that's not hard and fast. I'll kind of do a little bit, just a minute, talking about where I think it's at. I think, yeah, that's a little big by maybe 100 meters, but I'll get there. I will also say that the size of the original Constitution fluctuated a lot. Early on, it was 112 meters, then 200 meters, then 280, then eventually about 290 for the original Connie and about 300 for the refit. It's fiction, guys. Keep it in mind. I will say this has 28 decks. The original Constitution had 21, although it had a gooseneck that took up a couple extra decks. That this one just really doesn't have much of a gooseneck, which I'm fine with. One of the things. Has a crew of 500, which actually works really well. So same as the Inquiry, same as a lot of Starfleet ships. It's kind of considered just a medium to heavy cruiser. It's actually designed for close support and escort roles and to work within solar systems. Ever since at least Star Trek the Motion Picture, you're not supposed to go to warp inside a solar system. And with increased populations and civilian traffic, they gave this oversized, overpowered impulse drives, which cool. I'm fine with that. So it's got a lot of interest and whatnot in its engines. But it's not without tactical support as well. It has 7 phaser turret systems, 4 phaser arrays, and 3 quantum or photon torpedo tubes. Not to mention 3 shuttle bays, 1 main and 2 auxiliary. One big one back here, usual things. And this new style of engine we see on several ships that actually I really like. I'm a big fan of the movie era nacelles, and I think these, gives it a new look. Now, some have said that the Neo Constitutions were actually built using leftover saucers from like Miranda's or whatever. No, I don't think so. It's got its own look, and yeah, I just don't think it's modified from that, but I could be wrong, but it's very much taken from it. But what they were doing, this is one of the first designs to come out of the San Francisco Fleet Yards after the synth attack. Again, the inquiries we could say maybe came from a outside solar system source, but this is definitely a human design. And they were recycling what they could. This kind of explains the whole Titan A and the connection with Captain Shaw removing Riker's jazz from the computer and the captain's systems. While it's not built on the space frame of the Titan A, they use components. For example, the nacelles use some of the same shielding and warp core systems, leftover components, and a lot of the computer systems, maybe some of the phaser systems. You might say that's stupid. Why would they? Well, one, they're strapped for resources, and even if warp cores wear out, what if the ones on the Titan, when it was retired, were only a couple of years old? Why not put them in the next ship? And the reason I'm being a little forgiving here, this actually happens in the real world in naval tradition all the time, especially back in the World War II era. Guns, engines, pieces of flight deck were often taken from decommissioned ships and put on even new vessels. And this was a new design, even if maybe some of its parts were kind of recycled. Waste not, want not. Yeah, as the Titan original was decommissioned in 2396, the Titan A was commissioned in 2396, and it was given a 5-year mission. Classic. And it was under the command of Captain Shaw. Look, say what you will, but if you don't think Captain Shaw was at least one of the highlights of Picard, there's something wrong with you. That was great. And not just for the performance, not just for the character's arc, but also how he kind of demythologized Riker and Picard. I think it was great to see someone kind of not hero worship them. Because otherwise, season 3 of Picard would be way too fan servicey. It was already pushing it. Some might say it went overboard, but I think Captain Shaw did a lot to redeem it. It also really proved that you can have an all-new character that doesn't take away from the existing ones, but can also stand on their own without, pushing the other ones in the back. Again, something I can't really say for some new Star Trek, or Star Wars. That's how you do it. You don't give your legacy characters less screen time. You just make good new characters, and Captain Shaw was one of them. And some would say, well, it's a shame he died, and I agree, but he got a good death scene. Every actor likes a good death scene. And since that plot line has not been continued for the next few years at least, he at least had some resolution. Now, if Star Trek, what they call it, Legacy, had gone through, we might have been wanting Shaw back. And in Star Trek, they could have always found ways. I still, justice for Shelby. She shouldn't be dead. But anyway, back to the design. It's a powerful little ship. It definitely kind of gives the feeling of being a compact but capable ship. It definitely takes a beating. It has regular shields and metaphasic shields both. Again, very powerful. Impulse drives, the most modern warp systems, at least to reason, and good weapon systems. But it seems like a ship maybe a little more geared towards defending itself and science and observation, and just being a good standard support ship. It definitely doesn't feel like the most powerful ship in the fleet, which is fine. They have 200 of the Inquiry class. They don't need that. This seems like a ship you would just send in to do a lot of support stuff. But whereas the original Connie was a heavy cruiser, tip top of the fleet, this feels like a good like medium cruiser, like the Miranda class or the Nebula. And again, nothing at all wrong with that, because that's what the original Titan is. This does feel like it kind of fills that same role, just a little bit bigger, a little more powerful, just with a classic look. That said, though, the showrunners of Picard Season 2 and 3 really need to learn what the word refit means, because I don't think they know. Yeah. But what do you think of it? It's pretty neat, and I think this is a great place for FanHome to start, because it was the lead ship throughout all of Season 3. Important legacy. And had its own look. I mean, the newer ships seem to be kind of darker on the inside, a little more gunmetal and polished, little wider quarters. But to be fair, look at the motion picture vessels versus the original series. They got a little darker and more military too, so I think it's kind of in keeping. each era has its vibe. Back in the day, people used to kind of lovingly joke about the Enterprise D being the Hilton in space. Well, this is definitely not it. So every design has its pros and cons. But it's a cool ship. I think it's a good model. I guess I wish it stood out in my mind a little more. I like it. I just don't love it. But our next and final ship is actually the one I was wanting someone to do ever since it was introduced in the premiere episode of Season 2. The Sagan class USS Stargazer. Yeah, this was the ship at the very beginning and very end of Season 2 of Picard. I think we thought it would be the kind of main ship of the season. Well, not so much, but I do wish we'd seen more of it in the show. But it was neat to see Rios kind of redeem himself, and I liked him in Season 1. We have some later rapid promotions like 7 and 9 that I'm not so sure about, but he was already the captain in Starfleet, even if he was kind of had his issues, but it's fine. He could be redeemed. Why not? Then again, he had his own happy ending. So, whatever. But no, I like the original Stargazer. And I was very excited to see it being updated. And, naming a ship after Carl Sagan is pretty cool, I think. Very much like the original Stargazer, the Constellation class here. But just a little bigger, a little more beefy. This is about 540 meters long. It only has 16 decks because, most of that is in the main saucer hull section. Once you go up here, it's just kind of workspace. So I get it. Yeah, the livable part is just in this chunk here. And the in-universe explanation for foreign nacelles is just not so much a higher warp speed, but just redundancy. Sustainability. A lot of ships can go high warp, but then can only do it for 12 hours. When you have four nacelles, you can alternate between one pair and another pair, letting either downtime for cool off or repair. Or if, they're disabled, you still have a backup. It's been a thing. But the real-world explanation is that the quad nacelle ships always stand out. And it's a long-standing Star Trek tradition, so it fits right in. And if you'll notice, they're the same nacelle design as the Constitution 3, Neo Constitution, and very, very similar to the Phoenix, just, scaled up. This has the up-to-date shielding, metaphasic shielding as well, phaser arrays, quantum torpedo launchers, and as we know from 7 of 9, it's built with some Borg technology integrated. After years and decades, Voyager coming back with some Borg tech, studying the artifact cube, makes sense. Of course, it would lead to the whole fleet command system. Didn't turn out so well for him, but that's neither here nor there. This one here, the Stargazer, is really the second in its class, the first one being the USS Sagan itself. But the Carl Sagan ship was really kept back near or around the Sol system for research and testing. This was the first one to really be sent out into deep space. And that's another long-standing Star Trek tradition. Where's the USS Galaxy? Where's the USS Constitution? Typically, the lead ships are not kept back. Even the Excelsior, which eventually became the standard ship, actually stayed around space dock for about a decade with testing and evaluation. I know some kind of get upset that they say this is the first in their class, but the class was Sagan. I wouldn't worry about it. Star Trek has always kind of done that. But, the saucer is kind of a modern style. Elongated. Has a small deflector down here. Bridge up there. Quad nacelles and shuttle bays. Impulse drives back here. Everything you'd expect. And it is a long-range combat ship. I mean, I'd say heavy cruiser. Almost as long as an Inquiry, and probably even a little more modern. This is one of the most advanced ships we see in the fleet. And it seems like the initial batch was 15, including the Sagan herself. This would seem to be them kind of getting back on track, as we first see this in 2401. And then by 2402, we see several in the fleet. So it does show a certain recovery occurring after the synth attack. Now, I said this would kind of help give a scale towards the Constitution, and I do think so, because they use essentially the same size nacelles. Even though the models, they're not to scale with each other. That's just never how Eaglemoss and now FanHome does them. They're just to fit in a box. These are a little bit larger on the model, meaning that if they were to scale, this would be a little larger too. Basically what I'm saying is, if we measure nacelles, I would say the Neo Connie should be about 450, maybe close to 500 meters. So still bigger than the original Connie, but not quite the 560 we see. It's just personal headcanon. That could get easily refined. And again, it doesn't really matter in the long run. They both have similar crews of around 500, 550 on the Sagan class. And where this seems to be kind of old and new put together and medium cruiser support ship, the Stargazer here, it's a combat ship. I'm sure it has other abilities as well. A command ship comes to mind, but nope. And in addition to kind of following along from the Constellation, I think it follows in the path of the Prometheus class. We don't think about it a lot today, but actually harkens back to it, especially its saucer shape and everything, quite a bit. But like I said, this was the one when Season 2 of Picard first came out that I really wanted someone to do, and was very bummed out that Eaglemoss was going out of business. Because, yeah, I wanted this ship, and I'm not disappointed. I think FanHome did a really good job with it. All four nacelles are clear. It's got a lot of size to it. It's a little bit shorter than the Connie, but that's because it's much taller and there's just kind of more going on. And these are made to fit in a box and also made to be in a price point. And this was issue 2 in their collection. So the first 2 issues, really 3, because number 3 was the Farragut, were really good ships and all ones I really wanted in the collection. But looking at the 3 from Picard Season 3, I do think we see an issue here that may or may not matter. Phoenix class, very much inspired by the NX class. Of course, the Neo Constitution, a very close facsimile to the Constitution, and the Stargazer here, very close to the Constellation, although maybe not as close. And I think that is a danger, because they also had the Excelsior 2. Look, I like paying homage to past ships, and Star Trek has definitely kind of kept the same Federation look for a long time. But we have to be careful that we don't just keep recycling the same designs with minor updates. In the era of CGI and computer-generated, very high-quality meshes, we can go with some pretty neat designs. I think that's one reason I've been a little forgiving towards Discovery 31st century ships. A lot of them are trying something new, and I appreciate that, even if I didn't necessarily like all the designs. Kind of the same thing with the Inquiry. Even if it isn't your favorite, at least it is a different looking ship. And I do like that. And over here, well, the Luna class very much harkens back to the Miranda and the Nebula, but it has very much its own look, and I really enjoy it. Kind of the same thing goes with the Enterprise F, the Odyssey class. There's definitely a lot of galaxy. There's a ton of Sovereign there. But it also has its own looks, although it's not as unique as maybe I would like it to be. The Wallenberg, I actually really like it. It's probably the most unique ship on the table. Then again, doesn't mean it's the prettiest. No, I just think, as I said a minute ago, Season 3 of Picard is most folks' favorites, and I really enjoyed it too. But it really towed that line with fan service a little closer than maybe some of us would like. But then again, that was kind of the point of Picard as a series. With newer series going on, it's okay to let the old 80-year-old man reminisce a bit, and we wanted it too, for those of us who grew up with Next Generation. But we have to be careful we don't just indulge in nostalgia and keeping things the same. We need to push it forward because Star Trek is about the future and about progress. Also kind of about communism because, my lord, even today, some of the stuff from the 60s seems a little bit hippy-trippy. Back in the 60s, it was outright commie. So, don't ever think that Star Trek has gone woke, because Star Trek has been woke before the term woke even existed. I'm not saying you like it or hate it or whatever. I'm just pointing out a simple fact that in the 1960s, it was pretty extreme liberal and left-wing. Don't like that fact? Then, that's just Star Trek. I don't know what else to tell you. I turn on a Western. I like Westerns, but, Star Trek was very much of that. Gene Roddenberry was very much of that. I mean, it was baked in there, especially with the sex stuff. My God, that man was too far sexually liberal for even me. But, hey, to each their own. But, I have been really happy with the quality of FanHome, and then I like how the ships definitely fit in with the existing Eaglemoss designs. It's not radically different. I will say that Master Replicas seems to be doing some Star Trek ships finally, but they're the smaller scale, and so far they've just done like a small version of the Strange New Worlds Enterprise, or of there's another one from the Kelvin Enterprise in a small scale. I really like the small scale starships from the collection of Eaglemoss because we could get 2 a month, and the price was originally like $15-20 if you were a subscriber. These bigger ones, they could cost a lot more. Of course, they only release 1 a month, or sometimes one every 6 weeks, and you do get a ton more detail. I'll be honest, in the beginning I really liked the small ones, but now, with the bigger ones, it would be hard to go back to the small size. It really would. That said, when you're able to do so many little ones, I mean, they did 180 in the standard collection alone, and then several dozen specials, they could do some really zany, outlandish ones. When you do larger scales like this, you really have to do the fan favorites. It's like if you're a band playing a concert. If you only have 30 minutes, you got to play the greatest hits. If you're doing a 2-hour concert, you could do some covers, some B-sides, some sing-alongs, have some more fun. And I get it. You can't do some of the weirder ships if you're going to put this much time and money into one. But no, I really like them so far. I did enjoy Picard Season 3. I like 2. I even liked 1 at times. I know they're not perfect, but it's better than nothing. And I think if you really were to go back and rewatch Next Generation objectively, you'd realize that for every episode that was Measure of a Man, there's an episode like Rascals. The difference between then and now, these days a season is 10, maybe 13 episodes. Back then a season was 26, maybe as few as 24 episodes. That gives you a lot more room, and you just tend to forget about the bad ones. And of course we weren't streaming them and binging them back then, and they were very episodic. I do miss episodic TV. Everything's got to be this big, drama now, and overarching plot and everything, and it wouldn't be a bad thing to go back to episodic television. Strange New Worlds is trying it, and I think most of the time succeeding. I think Discovery is maybe the biggest victim if I was having to have an overarching plot. My God, if they just slowed it down, it would have been a lot better just to do individual episodes. I actually liked how Enterprise Season 4 did it too. Season 3, of course, had the whole Xindi plot, which was fine, but even then they took time off to do random tangent episodes. Season 4 was just multiple 2- and 3-parters, with occasionally a single episode in between to let the tension die. I enjoyed that style. I think Deep Space Nine did it very well too. We need to go back to that balance. Not one extreme where it's just totally episodic like the original series. Very, very rarely did one episode ever carry over to another. I don't want that. But I don't want like we got in Discovery. I think that was the biggest detriment, especially to seasons 4 and 5. Because if you build up to this big thing, it's almost always going to be a letdown. Almost every Discovery season, the ultimate thing, the ultimate mystery was a kind of a wet fart in a box. Anyway, doesn't mean I still didn't enjoy individual things. And I think other newer Star Trek, like Strange New Worlds and, yes, Picard, definitely Lower Decks, they've been enjoyable. And we would not have had those without Discovery. So we have to keep that in mind too. Plus, Discovery did give us Saru. If nothing else, we always will have Saru, and he was worth the show. We would have never got the new Christopher Pike too. So, yeah, a lot of good things came out of it, I would say. And again, if it sucks, what have you lost? I enjoyed my ships, though. And it's interesting to think about the journey from Eaglemoss to Master Replicas to now FanHome. And I hope we're still getting ships from them when it's 2030. But what do you think? I appreciate you hanging out today, just talking the diecast Star Trek Starships. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Feel free to discuss. I don't mind at all. Differing opinions, not one bit. As far as the designs, I've kind of explained what I do and don't like. And it'll be interesting to see kind of where FanHome ends up going. I think it's really neat that they're back. Although looking at their release, they're really only doing Starfleet Federation ships with just literally a couple of other ships like the Shrike. That's nice and all, but I would like to see more diversity, I'm not going to lie. I'd like to see some Romulan ships from Strange New Worlds. Maybe some new Klingon ships if they ever come out. I don't know. What do you think, though? Maybe you think we should just only do Federation Starfleet ships. To be fair, they definitely sell the best. No bones about it. But variety is, after all, the spice of life. With that, this is Misha. And once again, thank you for hanging out with me as we move into July. And I'll catch you very soon. Next time.